They are two of the darkest figures in world history. Their names conjure images of hatred and terror on an unprecedented scale. Hitler and Hussein. Their legacies are well known, yet few know the real story of how these two tyrants are actually linked in history. It is a deep and chilling association.
The Ba'ath Party was a fascist party.
For the first time, we'll examine how Saddam's infamous Ba'ath Party was modeled directly on the Nazis. How key figures in what would become the Ba'ath Party established an alliance with Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany during World War II. And how a leading Arab would even become the founder of SS units, charged with inflicting a reign of terror and bloodshed on thousands in Europe. Saddam and the Third Reich, next on the History Channel. March 2003. American and Allied forces storm into Iraq. Their mission, topple the government of the Iraqi dictator, Saddam Hussein. It takes just 3 weeks before the Iraqi armed forces are routed. American forces seize Baghdad, and scenes of U.S. troops inside Saddam Hussein's once magnificent palaces are broadcast around the world. On December 13th, Saddam Hussein, after 8 months on the run, is captured by American troops. With his long beard and disheveled hair, it's hard to believe that this is a man who is charged with the sadistic murder of tens of thousands of his own people, a tyrant who personally tortured many of his victims. How did Saddam Hussein rise to the pinnacle of power in Iraq? Who really were the Baathists, the party that Saddam controlled? What did they try to achieve? A little-known but terrifying reality is that the Ba'athist movement, its organization, and its methods were directly inspired by the German Nazi Party. The story of Saddam Hussein, the Nazi Party, and the Ba'ath Party begins nearly 2,000 miles from Iraq. It starts in the 1930s, in the French capital, Paris. There, a young Syrian named Michel Aflaq is studying at the University of Sorbonne. Aflaq will later go on to found and lead the Ba'ath Party and become one of the most important influences in the life of Saddam Hussein. Michel Aflaq is the son of a prosperous Syrian-Lebanese merchant family. Syria is a French colony, and it is the custom for the rich to send their sons to be educated in France. The experience will lead many young Syrians to admire French democracy. But not Michel Aflaq.
The kind of parliamentary democracy that the French had brought to Syria and Lebanon was largely a sham. So there were a lot of young people in Lebanon and Syria who saw parliamentary democracy as it was practiced there as completely bogus.
Europe in the 1930s is a hotbed of revolutionary politics. The continent is ravaged by mass unemployment and is fertile ground for extremist ideologies. In Germany, the Nazi Party has come to power. With their parades and uniforms and dangerous ideas, the fascists give the illusion of hope to those who have lost everything. The Nazis blame Jews and communists for all of Europe's ills. But for Michel Aflaq, the Nazi Party has an instant appeal. Hitler promises that Germany will correct the unjust legacy of the First World War. His words resonate powerfully with Afluk, who believes the Arabs have been shamefully mistreated by the British. During World War I, the Arab lands had formed part of the ancient Ottoman Turkish Empire. In 1914, the empire declared war on Russia, an ally of the British and French, and joined forces with Germany. In response, the Allies declared war on Turkey. The British, through their agent, the famous Lawrence of Arabia, promised the Arab tribes that by fighting the Turks and Germans, they would get a massive independent Arab state after the war, stretching all the way from Syria to Yemen. The war ended in defeat for the Germans and the Ottoman Empire. But in 1919, in the post-war carve-up of their territory, the Arab tribes had learned a harsh lesson in the politics of war. As the defeated Turkish Empire is broken up, the British get control of Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, while the French take Syria. They then ignore their promises to the Arabs, worrying that an Arab state will control the world's oil. To add insult to injury, the British go on to promise a Jewish national homeland in Palestine, without consulting the territory's Arab residents.
We see a strong Arab nationalist movement emerge in the Middle East that was, to a great extent, promoted by the British in their attempts to undermine the Ottoman Empire. Simultaneously, they were also promoting a Zionist cause as well, and we would later see that the problems of promoting these two ideas side by side would have for the British and then indeed Middle East politics as a whole.
To young Arab nationalists like Michel Afluk, the carve-up of the Arab world by the colonial powers was a bitter betrayal. Now, almost 2 decades later, Afluk believes that the Arab peoples can still achieve independence, but only if they unite. As his political model, Afluk looks to one man, Adolf Hitler. Afluk returns to Syria and with like-minded companions begins what he calls study circles, holding countless meetings all over the country. Afluk and his associates slowly begin to build what they call the Ba'ath movement. Ba'ath is the Arabic word for resurrection.
Michel Aflaq was a schoolteacher from Lebanon who was an Arab nationalist at heart, and in the 1940s began to organize a party, the Ba'ath Party, the Arab Renaissance Party, which gathered together like-minded Arab nationalists in Lebanon and in Syria.
Like the Nazi Party, as the Ba'ath Party grows, it sees the established great powers, especially Britain, France, and the United States, as the greatest obstacle to its vision. Under Hitler, Germany was showing that it could defy its enemies, intimidate others, and create its own destiny. The Ba'ath Party means to follow Hitler's example in the Arab world. To Michel Afluk, the overriding aim of the Ba'ath Party is to unite all the Arab peoples, from Morocco and across the entire North African coast, to modern-day Palestine, Iraq, Iran, and beyond. The Ba'ath Party will rule over the whole vast territory, creating a single, powerful fatherland.
The Ba'ath Party was focused mainly on nationalistic issues, to unify or create the Arab nation.
They believed that the Arab world should form one nation-state, and therefore all the boundaries set up by the British and the French in the 1920s should be dismantled, and there should be one large Arab state.
By the mid-1930s, the Nazi Party inspires Arab nationalist groups all over the Middle East. In Egypt, the Young Egypt movement holds mass rallies and torchlight processions, imitating the Nazis. And in Syria, a movement that will later merge with the Ba'ath Party even adopts the Nazi swastika as its emblem. A uniting theme between the between the Nazi Party and many radical Arab nationalists is a vehement hatred of Jews.
So there was a transport of ideas and structures of authoritarian, basically totalitarian structures and ideas from Germany to the Middle East, especially to Syria and Iraq.
The Ba'ath Party was a fascist party. It was an Arab fascist party, one of many Arab fascist parties. There were, of course, Nazi-style parties throughout the Middle East, Nazi allied policies, and the Ba'ath carried the flame.
All over the Middle East, Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, is translated into Arabic and sold in markets. This is all done with assistance from the Germans. Already, German embassies in the Arab capitals are spreading propaganda and making secret contacts with Arab nationalists.
Germany had a radio station, and it would start حي العرب هنا برلين. Salute the Arabs, here is Berlin, and this is Berlin radio station. So the Germans were agitating all Arab nationals against the British.
All across the Arab world, sympathy for Nazi ideas is spreading.
One thing you notice in the 1930s is increasingly Arab nationalist circles are influenced by the racist and anti-Semitic language of Nazi Germany.
By the late 1930s, the Ba'ath movement is still in its infancy, and its founder, Michel Aflaq, is barely known to the wider Arab public. But in the years to come, the party will grow into an organized, ruthless machine, one that will give Saddam Hussein an iron grip on Iraq. It will also form a savage secret police whose massive military power will enable Saddam to threaten the stability of the whole Middle East, while brutally putting down all dissent. Why was the Ba'ath so terrifyingly effective? Because deep in the historical roots of the Ba'ath Party was the hidden hand of Nazi Germany. (1936) Germany. Nazi persecution of German Jews is systematic and brutal. In charge of the campaign of racial purification is the chief of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. But few now know that Himmler is also paying close attention to events in the Middle East. Already, since Hitler's rise to power in 1933, 174,000 Jews have fled Nazi Germany and Eastern Europe for the safety of British-controlled Palestine. Now, Himmler begins to toy with the idea of forcing the rest of Germany's Jews to follow, a massed, forced exodus.
The first policy was to force the Jews out of Germany and as such to their own homeland, which was Palestine. He intended later to surround Palestine and destroy them there in one convenient container.
But for Himmler and his boss, Adolf Hitler, there is another reason for expanding their influence in the Middle East, especially Palestine. There, Arab nationalists bitterly opposed to the influx of Jews launch a series of uprisings against the British authorities. The uprising would reverberate back to Berlin.
The Palestinian issue had a major impact. We had the 1936 revolt by the Arab Palestinians against what they saw as Jewish incursions. This kind of expansion was seen at a certain point was seen as dangerous. So the upheaval in Palestine it had its influence on the minds and hearts of Arab nationalists and the public at large.
To many Palestinian Arabs, the arrival of European Jews from Germany, Russia, and elsewhere, tolerated by the British administration, is deeply threatening. Once a small minority, Jews now number a third of the population.
in the politics of Palestine of the 1930s, with increasing Jewish settlement, with increasing resentment by the Arab Muslim populations of the Zionist project in Palestine and of Jewish settlement, a very discontented Palestine emerges, and you have riots at the end of the 1920s and a revolt in the mid-1930s.
Militant Arabs declare a general strike, and to pile on the pressure, organize a vicious campaign of violence against Jews and the British. The leader of this uprising is a man named Amin al-Husseini, former Turkish army officer, and now known as the Grand Mufti, or senior Islamic leader of Jerusalem. Amin controls the revolt from a hideout on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, which the British fear to attack in case they inflame Muslim opinion around the world.
And to the exclusion of Christians and Jews.
As the revolt grows into a full-scale uprising, the British declare martial law. The entire country is put in lockdown. They rush 20,000 troops to Palestine to put down the rebels. But the Grand Mufti has secretly met with German and Italian intelligence agents, and the British suspect his forces are getting German arms. Desperately seeking a solution, the British offer to partition Palestine between the Jews and the Arabs. Jewish Palestinians accept the proposal, but the Arabs, led by the Grand Mufti, refuse. What becomes known to Arabs as the Great Uprising will continue. It will cost the lives of more than 5,000 Arabs, 400 Jews, and 200 British before it's all over. 15,000 people are wounded. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his SS chief Heinrich Himmler see the situation in Palestine as an opportunity. If the British create a new Jewish state, could that be Germany's chance to expel its remaining Jews? Could the Arab nationalists prove useful allies of Germany? To find out, Heinrich Himmler sends a trusted emissary on a secret mission to the Middle East.
Adolf Eichmann was one of the leading organizers of the extermination of Jews. He was the head of a related department in the security service. He visited himself Palestine and Egypt in 1937, looking for allies and partners and establishing networks.
In Cairo, Eichmann meets a journalist, a member of the Grand Mufti's inner circle. One day the world will know Eichmann as a mass murderer. But now, in November 1937, he is sounding out anti-British Arabs. The Mufti is in hiding, but on his behalf the journalist asks Eichmann for German money and arms with which to fight the British. He also makes it clear that Amin wants the Germans to stop Jewish immigration from Germany into Palestine. 4 years earlier, the Grand Mufti had contacted the Germans, offering his help in supporting the Nazi cause in exchange for help against the British and the Jews. That time, he got a cool reception. Now, with World War II on the horizon, he hopes it will be different. But as his envoy reports back on his meeting with Eichmann, it is clear that although the Nazis support the Palestinian Arab cause, they are cautious. They have no intention of giving aid on the massive scale the Mufti wants. In the summer of 1938, the Arab insurrection in Palestine against the British and Jews reaches a bloody climax. 10,000 Arab fighters battle across the country. British authorities introduce draconian measures, imprisonment without trial, and demolishing the houses of suspected rebels. As for the leaders of the rebellion, the British arrest 5 members of the Mufti's Arab Committee and ship them to a remote island in the Indian Ocean. However, the Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, is not among them. As the battle in Palestine rages, the most important rebel of them all escapes to Lebanon.
That revolt pinned the British down in the period 1936 to 38 in quite a severe way, in the sense that the British found themselves faced by an insurrection across different parts of Palestine, had to use increasing military force to stamp it out. They did eventually defeat it militarily, and of course they dismissed the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin Husseini, from his post, and he fled into exile.
For more than 2 years in 1939, the British succeed in putting down the rebellion. However, as a concession to the Arabs, they agree to one of the Grand Mufti's demands. For the time being, they will shelve the idea of a Jewish state. While the Palestinian uprising is coming to an end, events in Europe take a dramatic turn. In September 1939, German armies smash their way into Poland. As the cataclysm of World War II engulfs the great European powers, the waves will sweep through the Middle East. There they will spark an extraordinary chain of events that leads directly to the rise of Saddam Hussein. May 1940, German armies sweep into France. France, a great European power with the largest military machine in Europe, is laid low in weeks. With the defeat of France, French colonies around the world, in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, are left in political limbo. What will happen now? Will France keep its colonies, or will Germany take over?
France, of course, has surrendered to Germany. It set up Vichy France, which is effectively a collaborationist regime with Nazi Germany. And the colonies of much of the French Empire, including the mandated territories of Syria and Lebanon, fall under Vichy France. So they become effectively part of the Axis orbit.
In the French territory of Syria, Michel Aflaq, a former teacher and now leader of the Ba'ath movement, senses a historic opportunity. With the French weakened, dreams of an independent Arab Syria may soon be a reality. The fascist Ba'ath movement, up to now forced by the French authorities to operate underground, comes out into the open and begins recruiting young men who share its vision. It is the beginning of a whole new phase in Aflaq's campaign to unite the Arab world. While Aflaq plans revolution in Syria, his contemporary, the Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, arrives in Iraq. Here he will open the next front in his fight against the British. Iraq was created by the British after World War I, out of 3 separate and warring provinces of the old Turkish Empire: Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra. Iraq's borders were drawn by the British civil servant, archaeologist, and Arabic scholar Gertrude Bell, working closely with Lawrence of Arabia. In 1921, at a conference in Cairo attended by Winston Churchill, Iraq was given limited independence. To mark the occasion, Lawrence, Gertrude Bell, and Winston Churchill posed for a photograph mounted on camels.
A treaty was entered into with the new government of Iraq to ensure that major air bases were retained in the country, together with the right to move troops through, should the need occur, to reinforce effectively other parts of the British Empire at that time.
Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the British military protected Iraq's oil, which was exploited by a British oil company. As for the Iraqi royal family, with its boy king, many Iraqis began to see them as puppet rulers created by the British. They feel their country's independence is bogus and bitterly resent the British presence. It is fertile ground for the anti-British agitation of the Grand Mufti. Everyone in Iraq knows of the Grand Mufti's rebellion in Palestine. Now in Baghdad, he is treated like a hero. The Mufti's aim is to take advantage of any and all British weakness, now that they are at war with Germany. His secret plan is to mount a coup that will throw out the Iraqi government and the British military.
The Mufti of Jerusalem found a very warm welcome in Iraq, and it's often said that he became part of the backbone of the Iraqi Arab nationalist resistance against the British. The British felt very uneasy about his presence there, but couldn't do much about it.
Amin already has the secret backing of powerful figures in the Iraqi government and army. He also has massive funds gathered in Iraq and all over the Middle East. What he needs now is Hitler's support for his ambition of uniting the Arab world. In the fall of 1940, the Mufti sends his German-speaking private secretary on a secret mission to Berlin. There, the secretary meets the Nazi foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop. The Grand Mufti wants von Ribbentrop to give German backing to his ultimate goal of a united Arab nation. He also demands a free hand in dealing with the Jewish populations of Palestine and the other Arab states. In return, the Mufti promises that Germany and Italy will have full access to Iraqi oil once the British are thrown out. Although von Ribbentrop is eager to work the Arabs against the British, Hitler is uncertain. He has long since agreed with his ally Mussolini that the Middle East is Italy's sphere of interest, and Italy is already fighting the British in North Africa. In Hitler's eyes, the Arabs are Mussolini's business. The Grand Mufti is bitterly disappointed. Ribbentrop tells the Mufti's secretary he will have to be content with a vague promise of German arms and money, and even then only if the Italians agree. In fact, Mussolini has no intention of backing any moves toward independence for Arab states. What Mussolini really wants is German help for his armies in North Africa, struggling to avoid complete annihilation by the British. In February 1941, Hitler sends his star commander, General Erwin Rommel, to North Africa with tanks and infantry. Immediately, Rommel's Africa Corps, backed by the Italians, goes on the offensive. In battle after battle, Rommel pummels British forces. The dramatic successes of the Germans against the British in North Africa galvanized the Grand Mufti and his supporters in Baghdad. Rommel's victories are the chance they have been waiting for. Fronted by an Iraqi army officer named Rashid Ali, nationalists begin to organize an Iraqi pro-German revolt. If they can inflict a defeat on the British in Iraq, they might tip the balance in favor of a major German victory in the Middle East.
The pro-Axis coup of 1941 was an effort to oust British influence from Iraq, which of course was Allied influence, destroyed the British military bases in Iraq, and turned the oil over to the Nazis.
Had Rashid Ali's government succeeded in moving the British out of Iraq in 1941. The situation would have completely destabilized, I think, the British position in the Middle East. It would have allowed Axis troops to be moved into Iraq in the rear of the British forces who were seeking to re-establish the position in the Western Desert.
For decades to come, the Iraqi revolt of April 1941 will be an inspiration to Arab nationalists everywhere, most of all to the future dictator of Iraq. Stories about how the British were challenged in Iraq and almost defeated will inspire Saddam Hussein all through his teenage years. The reason is that one of the Iraqi army officers taking part in the coup is Saddam Hussein's uncle. In early April 1941, the British in the Middle East face annihilation. The tanks of the brilliant German General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, have leveled British forces and now threaten to punch through its last defenses and pour into Egypt. Rommel's Africa Corps arrives in Italian-controlled Libya on February 12, 1941. Beginning in Tripoli, the panzers pursue the retreating British, and on April 15th reach the Egyptian border. Rommel now threatens the Suez Canal, Britain's link with its empire, and might even smash right through Palestine and Jordan, all the way to the oil fields of Iraq. The German advance means the British now face the horrifying possibility that they might lose control of the whole Middle East, and with it, Britain's main oil supply. If that happens, they could lose the war. Meanwhile, to many Arabs, Rommel appears not as a foreign invader, but as a liberator who will drive the colonialist British out of Arab lands for good.
When the newsreels would run in the Baghdad cinemas with Churchill being shown and with Hitler being shown, Churchill was booed and Hitler was cheered. The placards all over the markets said, "In heaven, your master is Allah. On earth, it is Adolf Hitler."
As Rommel's panzers threaten the whole British position in the Middle East, in Iraq the British suddenly face a totally unexpected attack. On April 10, 1941, conspirators led by Rashid Ali and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, launched their carefully planned coup.
As far as the young Iraqi officers were concerned, they had no love for the British. They were nationalist, and they believed that the Germans, the Axis powers, were going to win the war.
Among the army officers involved in the coup is Khairallah Tulfa, a fervent admirer of the Nazis. For Tulfa, this is the most important moment of his life. In the years to come, Tulfa will recount his experiences again and again to his favorite nephew, the future dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein. In the early stages of the Iraqi coup, Amin al-Husseini has stayed in the background. Now he takes center stage. As the Grand Mufti or senior Islamic leader in Jerusalem, Amin first issues a fatwa, or religious edict. He solemnly instructs all Muslims to rise up and fight the British in Iraq. He declares a jihad, a holy war. The news rocks London. So great is the threat to the British from the Grand Mufti that he goes to the top of the list of Britain's most wanted in the Arab world. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill even approves a plan to kill or capture Britain's #1 enemy in the Middle East. Churchill also orders sabotage missions to blow up Iraqi oil wells, aiming to stop them from falling into German hands. In fact, in the chaos of the Iraqi battle, neither plan reaches fruition. The Grand Mufti has long ago promised the Germans that Iraqi oil will be theirs. With Rommel's offensive in full swing, it looks like the Mufti might soon deliver that prize that Germany needs the most. For the Grand Mufti, the rewards could be immense.
If the Nazis had won the war, and if the Nazis had taken control over the Middle East, the Mufti would have been the Governor General, or the titular king of the Middle East.
In Iraq, the British and their tribal allies are hopelessly outnumbered by the well-equipped Iraqi army. When the Iraqis officially announce an alliance with Germany, a British-German showdown is inevitable. After days of rising tension, British families are evacuated to Habanaya airfield, 60 miles from Baghdad, from where they are to be flown out of Iraq. At Habanaya, there are almost 2,500 British servicemen and civilians. The only aircraft they have are obsolete training planes with student pilots. Around the base are massed 5,000 Iraqi troops with heavy artillery. The Iraqis refuse to let anyone in or out.
Well, initially the British capabilities were very limited because they only had training aircraft which included a few Elsley fighters at Habanaya.
The British know they need to take decisive action to save the base at Habanaya and the British presence in Iraq. They decide to attack without warning. For the British, it is a race against time. If the Iraqis can persuade the Germans to send combat aircraft to join the battle, it will be all over for the British in Iraq. April 1941. News of the pro-German coup in Iraq quickly reaches Berlin, but Adolf Hitler pays no attention. He is preoccupied with his plan to invade the Soviet Union, the greatest risk of his career. With the Führer showing little interest in the Middle East, it falls to von Ribbentrop to see Iraq as a historic opportunity. He orders an immediate study of the ways in which Germany can help the Iraqis. One thing is clear. Any help will have to be sent by air. Eventually, von Ribbentrop gets Hitler's permission to supply the Iraqis with money and arms. But what Amin al-Husseini and the Iraqis want most from the Germans at this crucial point is not weaponry or even money, but air support from the Luftwaffe. The British are about to go on the offensive at the Habanaya Air Base, 60 miles outside of Baghdad. Time is everything.
The British acted remarkably quickly. They ceased flying training at Habanaya and formed all the training aircraft there, together with the instructors and the most promising of the pupil pilots, into an air striking force.
Although few of the pilots have ever flown a combat mission, they are thrown into action regardless of the risks. In May 1941, the British aircraft launched ferocious bombing and machine gun attacks on the Iraqi artillery positions. The British plan is to eviscerate the Iraqi artillery with air attacks by the squadron, joined by heavy bombers based nearby. In a two-pronged attack, infantry raids keep the Iraqis off balance, while the RAF widens its operations, attacking Iraqi air bases and wiping out the Iraqi Air Force. At the same time, in one of the boldest transport operations of the whole war, British civilian aircraft fly 400 troops from India to the Iraqi city of Basra, a distance of 1,500 miles. Their mission is to reinforce a march on the Iraqi capital, Baghdad.
The British Air Forces, both within Habanya and from the surrounding areas, attacked so strongly that within a week the Iraqi troops had given up their positions and were retreating on Baghdad in some confusion.
After 6 days of fighting, the British drive the Iraqis away from the Habanaya air base and break the siege. The retreating Iraqis leave behind large quantities of supplies and weapons. But the battle for control of Iraq has just begun. Reinforced by their captured artillery, the British march on the Iraqi city of Fallujah. But by now, the Grand Mufti and the Iraqi leaders are at last getting help from the Germans.
They sent in a small air contingent, which effectively involved 7 bombers, 12 long-range fighters, and some transport aircraft and their support crews, and a single unit of Italian biplane fighters. And that was the extent of the Axis support when it actually came to it.
Although the Germans fly a large number of missions bombing and machine gunning British columns and the Habanaya airfield, the attacks achieve little. They are never coordinated with Iraqi troops on the ground and manage to destroy only a handful of British aircraft. In spite of German airstrikes, the British fly in reinforcements to the base and prepare to launch an attack on Baghdad. British aircraft attack the German bases at Mosul, Kirkuk, and Rashid, destroying 20 aircraft. After capturing Fallujah, the British launch a determined attack on the Iraqi capital. It's over before it starts. On May 31st, 1941, the Iraqis sue for peace. The defeat of the uprising by the British is a major disaster for the Iraqis. All over the Arab world, the news is greeted with dismay. The British will keep Iraqi oil and their strategic bases, but they have inflicted a humiliation on the Iraqis and the Arab world that will reverberate down the years. One of the Iraqi army officers captured by the British is Khairallah Tulfa, the uncle and foster father of Saddam Hussein.
The British reinvaded and reoccupied Iraq, overthrew the government of Rashid Ali al-Gailani, chased out and hunted down many of the conspiratorial young army officers, and then instigated a major purge of the Iraqi army officer corps. And Saddam Hussein's uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, was one of the victims of that purge in the sense that he was dismissed from the armed forces and thereafter lived a rather embittered life.
In later years, Saddam Hussein will hear again and again the story of his uncle's imprisonment, his harsh treatment, and the disastrous failure of Iraq's uprising against the imperialist British enemy. Although the British defeat the pro-Nazi coup in Iraq, and Rommel's campaign to capture the Middle East ends in disaster at the Battle of El Alamein, the alliance between the Grand Mufti Amin al-Husseini and Nazi Germany is far from over. He escapes from Iraq to Berlin. If the British and the Jews can't be defeated in the Middle East, the Grand Mufti means to ensure they are defeated in Europe.
When the coup d'etat failed in 1941, the Mufti could not stay in Baghdad. Had he stayed, he would have been arrested. So he went to Berlin. He was there like a statesman.
In Berlin, the Mufti will soon prove his value. Before the war is over, he will create his own Muslim SS units, launching a reign of terror whose atrocities will become a byword for cruelty and barbarism. Fall, 1941. German divisions are racing through the Soviet Union, smashing the Soviet Red Army in their path. In the wake of their advance, SS Einsatzgruppen, or Special Operations Units, ruthlessly round up and kill communists and Jews. The Nazi final solution is gathering a frightful momentum. On November 20th, just 3 months after Hitler invades the Soviet Union, the Grand Mufti Amin al-Husseini is in Berlin, safe from British pursuit. He is welcomed to the Nazi capital by the German Foreign Minister, von Ribbentrop. The Mufti failed in Iraq, but he is convinced that a Nazi victory in the war will, in the end, give him everything he wants. Once again, he asks von Ribbentrop for German promises to support Arab independence. He insists that the Jews of the Middle East are part of a world conspiracy, and makes it clear that he fully supports their complete annihilation. He asks von Ribbentrop for FaceTime.
And Mufti wanted Hitler to promise an Arab national state in the Middle East, in the ancient lands of Islam. And that's exactly what Hitler was willing to offer them, either quietly or openly, depending upon the nature of the context.
8 days after he is greeted in Berlin by von Ribbentrop, the Grand Mufti has his long sought-after meeting with Adolf Hitler.
Hitler explained to him that he would ask every people in the Middle East to deal with their Jews and to solve the Jewish problem. And it was clear what he meant. He meant to organize another Holocaust in the Middle East.
With Hitler's blessing, the Grand Mufti is introduced to the chief of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler, his subordinate Adolf Eichmann, and al-Husseini become close friends. Himmler gives the Mufti the rank of Gruppenführer in the SS, the equivalent of general, and gives Amin and his followers a generous monthly allowance to set up an Arab bureau in Berlin.
The Mufti was everywhere in Germany during World War II. He was parading up and down the street. He was making official visits. He was making embassy visits. He was on Radio Berlin nightly.
Himmler puts the Mufti in charge of all Arabic broadcasting from Berlin. Over the airwaves, al-Husseini repeatedly calls for another Arab uprising against the British. He also rails against the Jews, inciting Arabs to, quote, kill the Jews wherever you find them.
In all of his speeches afterwards, he would always explain there are three big enemies: the British, the Americans, and the Jews. He would depict America as the big enemy of the Arabs.
The Mufti hated Jews. He hated Zionism. His goal was to destroy the Jews, kill them, before they were allowed to immigrate.
In 1943, the Grand Mufti learns of plans by Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, countries allied to Germany, to let thousands of Jews leave for the safety of Palestine. Through his influence with Himmler and von Ribbentrop, the Mufti immediately has the programs canceled. Among the planned emigrants are 4,000 children. Their fate in Nazi-controlled Europe is almost certain death. In the last 4 years of war, Germany has suffered enormous casualties on the battlefield. The Reich is desperate for fighting men. Heinrich Himmler begins recruiting Muslims from the Balkans with the enthusiastic help of the Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini. The Mufti helps raise the Bosnian Muslim 13th SS Division Handjar, along with other units of what the Mufti calls his Arab Legion. Altogether, the Grand Mufti helps recruit 30,000 men for the Nazi war machine. Ironically, in Nazi racial theory, Arabs are seen as inferior racial stock and not eligible for SS membership. Himmler treats foreign SS units with contempt as second-class citizens. But after an extensive physical exam for the Mufti, he makes an exception. For this, he has Hitler's approval.
The personal physician of the Grand Mufti evaluated the Grand Mufti, and he said he is not an Arab. He's a Caucasian, almost an Aryan. So we can expect that he will be a really reliable ally for us.
The SS Division Handjar is deployed hunting down underground resistors in Yugoslavia and acts as an internal security force in Hungary. The division is responsible for a series of atrocities against partisans and Jews. In April 1945, as Allied troops fight their way through Germany in the last battles of the war in Europe, the story of the Mufti's Muslim regiments takes one final twist. As the cataclysmic battle for Berlin rages around Hitler's bunker, among the Nazi troops making their last suicidal stand are 100 men of the Mufti's Arab Legion. With the Allied victory, the war is over. But the influence of Nazi Germany on the Middle East is far from over. In Iraq, the Grand Mufti's legacy will fan the flames of a new and potent force, one that will mold a young Arab nationalist into a cunning and brutal dictator. After the war in Europe ends, in 1945, the Allies set up the Nuremberg war crimes trials to bring to justice the perpetrators of wartime atrocities. One by one, the surviving senior Nazis are convicted of crimes against humanity. The Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, is denounced for war crimes committed by his Bosnian SS squads in Yugoslavia. But he will never sit in a Nuremberg dock. And the reason?
Oil. The Allies needed to keep the confidence and to keep the support of the restive and fomenting Arab communities in the Middle East.
The Grand Mufti escapes justice, finding refuge in Egypt. There he resumes his activities and goes on to become one of the most influential leaders in the Arab world for the next 20 years. The uprising. The British keep a firm grip on Iraq. The monarchy is restored, and the young King Faisal has even been to school in England. So confident are the British that some of those who took part in the coup of 1941 are released from prison. Among them is Saddam Hussein's uncle Khairallah Tulfa. Like many of his fellow pro-German rebels, Tulfa faces a difficult future. Banned from rejoining the Iraqi army, he becomes a village schoolteacher in Tikrit, his tribal home. It is a modest occupation, but to many young Iraqis, Tulfa is a hero. One of his deepest admirers is his young nephew, Saddam Hussein.
Saddam was basically orphaned at a very young age, probably when he was 2 or 3. He was born into a very poor family, so he was basically sent off to live with his uncle Khairallah, who lived in Tikrit, and it was through Kairala that eventually Saddam got some semblance of an education.
Because Saddam didn't start school until he was 11, he was behind his classmates in reading and writing. He was mercilessly teased and bullied.
The one thing Saddam was good at was using his fists, and so he defended his family honor by beating people up.
The young Saddam Hussein worships his uncle, whom he sees as a freedom fighter for the Arab cause. In the coming years, Saddam will absorb from Kairala Tulfa a hatred of the British and the Jews, and a deep admiration for fascism.
This was the kind of man that Saddam Hussein was intimately connected with in the 1940s and 50s. A man who had no love for the British, who hated the monarchy. It's not really surprising that Saddam Hussein gravitates towards the Ba'ath Party.
Kairala Tulfa writes a pamphlet voicing his anger at being excluded from the army and from politics. It is entitled, "Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies." In it, Tulfa vents his hatred of Jews, Iranians, and Kurds, and dreams of uniting the Arab world. In the aftermath of the war, the situation in the Middle East is changing fast. Thousands of Jews who have survived the Nazi campaign of extermination flee to Palestine. The British try to prevent them from settling, but the Jewish underground fights back. The Jewish resistance group Irgun blows up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, the main British headquarters. 91 people are killed in the attack. As Palestine's Jewish population soars, tensions between Arabs and Jews reach fever pitch. Each side launches brutal attacks on the other. With Palestine spiraling into civil war, the British decide they can no longer remain. In November 1947, the United Nations announces that Palestine is to be partitioned into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. While the Jewish population is jubilant at the news of independence, the Arabs refuse to accept the partition plan. Bitter fighting breaks out between heavily armed Jewish and Arab militias. As the British pull out their military forces as part of the UN agreement, troops from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq stream into Palestine to snuff out the new state of Israel. After a year of bloody battles, in which 10,000 people die, the Israelis win a decisive victory. The outcome is a violent shock to Arab nationalists, especially the young. Soon they start looking for someone to blame for the defeat. The Middle East is ripe for revolution. At the center of that revolution is the Ba'ath movement, headed by Michel Aflaq. Over the past 2 decades, the Ba'ath Party has exploded throughout the Middle East. Ba'ath is now a full-scale political force, based in the Syrian capital, Damascus. Aflaq now helps to set up a new wing of the party in Iraq. Just when fascism is defeated in Europe, it returns to the Middle East in the guise of the Ba'ath Party.
For many young Iraqis, Ba'athism had quite an appeal, promising a greater future for the Arab world. It seemed to be a unification of the Arab world, getting rid of the boundaries imposed upon it by colonialism.
And they liked it, and they read it, and they joined the Ba'ath Party.
Two men strongly attracted to the party and its fascist ideology are Kairala Tulfa and his nephew Saddam Hussein. In the 1950s, Saddam and his uncle moved to Baghdad to be closer to the political action. Tulfa makes contact with the Ba'ath Party, and under his uncle's influence, Saddam joins too.
So he was tall, handsome, kind of obedient, silent, mostly because he had no education. At that time, he hadn't even completed his secondary school.
Saddam wants to join the Iraqi army as his uncle did before him, a tradition among the young men in his home district of Tikrit. But his ambitions are thwarted.
Saddam very much wanted to go to the prestigious Baghdad Military Academy. His problem was, because he was basically an impoverished peasant boy with a very rudimentary education, he simply didn't have the qualifications to enroll. And this was yet another source of great resentment for Saddam. And it was really because of his failure to get into the Baghdad Military Academy that he found himself being associated with the Ba'ath Party, which of course was in its infancy in Iraq at that time.
Less than 5 years after the Iraqi branch of the Ba'ath Party is founded, it makes its first grab for power. An alliance of army officers, Baathists, and communists plot to overthrow the pro-British monarchy of King Faisal. The leader of the plotters is a general in the Iraqi army named Abdul Karim Qasem. In just over a year, in an ironic twist, Qasem himself will be the target of a dramatic assassination attempt by none other than the young Saddam Hussein. Later, as the dictator of Iraq, Saddam will admit that the Qasem affair changed the whole course of his future life. Baghdad, July 14, 1958. The Ba'ath Party's dream of overthrowing the Iraqi government is a reality. The army rebels storm the royal palace and massacre King Faisal II, along with his wife and children.
There was a coup d'etat in Iraq. The army, or elements of the army, overthrew the monarchy in Iraq and brought to power not Baathists, but brought to power Arab nationalists, although the Baathists supported the coup, and also Iraqi nationalists, and also communists.
With the end of the pro-British regime, army officers who took part in the ill-fated pro-German rebellion against the British back in 1941 are applauded as Iraqi patriots. Men who had been imprisoned or exiled are now rewarded, especially those who had joined the Ba'ath Party. One of them is Saddam Hussein's uncle, Khairallah Tulfa. Tulfa is given public recognition at last. He is made head of schools education in Tikrit. Although members of the Ba'ath Party are appointed to the new Iraqi government, the regime is now dominated by the pro-Soviet Iraqi Communist Party, the largest in the Arab world. The Ba'ath Communist alliance soon turns sour. One communist official succeeds in getting Saddam's uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, fired from his job. It is the event that triggers Saddam Hussein's first confirmed murder.
Saddam was commissioned basically by Khairallah to kill a local Communist Party official in Tikrit who'd upset Khairallah by basically saying he didn't have the necessary qualifications to do the job he was doing in Tikrit's educational establishment.
Outraged, Tulfa sends his nephew to get revenge. He gives Saddam his own pistol for the job. Saddam coolly ambushes his target, killing him with a single shot to the head. It is his first step in a lifetime career of cold-blooded killing.
I'm told, by the way, that his murder of the Communist Party official was very efficient. So, at a very early age, he had the hallmark of an executioner.
The man who led the coup against the government, General Abdul Karim Qasem, is the new leader of Iraq. To strengthen his communist ties, soon after taking power, Qassem invites 2,000 Eastern European and Soviet advisors to Baghdad. Qassem's friendship with the Soviets raises intense suspicion in Washington. The Cold War is dividing the world into two armed camps, one dominated by the Soviet Union and the other by the United States. Many inside Iraq and outside now see Qassem as a threat to the West.
If one could say that there was one thing the Baathists at that stage hated more than the colonialists, it was the communists. As the left-leaning regime of Abdul Karim Qasim emerges in Iraq after 1958, the Baath begins to organize conspiratorially inside the armed forces and elsewhere.
To the Baathists, Qassem's ties with the communists are bad enough, but he now also rejects their policy of uniting the Arab world. Within a year of coming to power with the help of the Baath Party, the very same Baathist leaders plot to kill Qassem. Saddam Hussein is selected to be part of a 5-man squad assigned to carry out the hit.
One of the reasons Saddam was recruited to the Baath Party in the late 1950s is the Baath Party in Baghdad was made up of middle-class intellectuals. The Baath Party desperately needed muscle, and that is why Khairallah said that Saddam should join the Baath Party, recommended him to join the Baath Party, because he was good with his fists, he was a killer, and he was somebody that they could get out on the streets of Baghdad and get their message across. And that is really the origins of Saddam's association with the Baath Party. It was not ideological, it was physical.
The attempt to assassinate General Qassem is launched on October 7, 1959. Saddam's job is to provide covering fire for the other assassins, but the attack turns into a bloody fiasco. Saddam is caught in the crossfire and wounded in the leg by one of his fellow assassins. In the attack, General Qassem is badly hurt, but lives. His driver is killed, along with one of the would-be assassins. Saddam runs for his life and goes into hiding. In the following weeks, several of Saddam's co-conspirators are captured, tried, and sentenced to death. Saddam is sentenced to death in his absence, but succeeds in getting out of Iraq, first to Syria, then to Egypt. It will be almost 4 years before Saddam can return to Baghdad, years during which he makes some powerful and influential allies. Among them is none other than the legendary founder and leading light of the Baath Party, Michel Aflaq. Like most of the Baath Party leadership based in Syria, Michel Aflaq is a theoretician and an intellectual. He needs operatives of a tougher sort. He sees in the young and ruthless Saddam a potential strongman of immense promise, a thug to do the dirty work. From Syria, Aflaq sends Saddam to Egypt, where he spends the next 3.5 years. There, Saddam lives in an expensive district of Cairo and enrolls at Cairo University to study law. In Egypt, Saddam marries his uncle Khairallah Tulfa's daughter, Sagida, firmly cementing his most important family tie.
This is when there are allegations, although not altogether proven, that he established contact with the CIA and the American secret agencies in Cairo. And the reason put forward for that was that the Americans, just as other people, were very nervous about Abdul Karim Qasim, the leader of Iraq's connection with the Communist Party and through the Communist Party to the Soviet Union.
In February 1963, Iraqi army officers, some aligned with the Baath Party, planned to seize power in a coup backed by Western intelligence agencies. the coup will transform Saddam Hussein from low-level enforcer to rising star in the treacherous hierarchy of the Ba'ath Party. While Saddam Hussein is exiled in Cairo, dramatic events are taking place in Iraq. On February 8, 1963, army officers allied with the Ba'ath Party seize control in a shockingly violent and brutal coup. General Qasem, whom Saddam had failed to murder 4 years before, is arrested, tortured, and then executed.
In 1963, there's a coup d'etat which kills Abdul Karim Qasim and brings a Ba'ath Party regime to power. And that's when Michel Aflaq thinks that the Ba'ath Party in Iraq will begin to develop as he believes it should develop, but it doesn't.
One of the leaders of the coup is a man named Ahmed Hassan al-Bakur, a senior army officer. Bakur, a dedicated Ba'athist, is a tribal cousin of Saddam Hussein and close to Saddam's uncle, Khairallah Tulfa. While the coup is underway, Saddam Hussein is still in Cairo, but he hurries back to Iraq. When Saddam gets back to Baghdad, his reputation as a loyal and unscrupulous party man, capable of extreme violence, immediately gets him a job as head of the secret party intelligence organization. His first job is to organize a roundup of the Iraqi Communist Party and anyone suspected of being a left-wing sympathizer. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people are seized, tortured, and murdered. Saddam even personally kills some of the victims. But within a year of taking power in Iraq, the new Ba'athist government starts to fall apart. The military is suspicious of the civilians, and while some Ba'athists want to unify Iraq and Syria, others are fiercely opposed.
So there were rifts within the military cliques of the Ba'ath Party, there were rifts within the party itself, and so bad was it that at one point they call in Michel Aflaq and the National Command, as it was called, of the Ba'ath Party to sort things out. And the Syrians come and say what needs to be done.
From Syria, Michel Aflaq goes to Iraq to make peace between the rival elements of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party. While in Baghdad, he uses his influence to get Saddam promoted to high rank in the movement. Saddam is made a member of the Ba'ath Regional Command, the committee that takes all the major executive and policy decisions for the Iraqi party.
Hassan al-Bakr, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, became the leader of the party and Saddam his deputy. This nomination, self-appointment, if you like, was endorsed by Michel Aflaq. And here comes the friendship between Michel Aflaq and Saddam Hussein. And all those who opposed the appointment of Saddam Hussein, even those who stayed in the party with Saddam Hussein, were later either executed or killed one way or another. Saddam never forgave those who opposed his first appointment. He kept that deep down in his heart and exacted his own revenge.
As attempts to restore unity in the Ba'ath Party fail, in November 1963, the military ejects the Ba'athists from the government. The climate is one of bitter resentment and suspicion. Many Ba'athist leaders are exiled or jailed. Control in Iraq starts to fall apart.
1963 was a very troubled year. It was a year of street fighting, murders, disappearances, of an underground warfare. The Ba'ath Party found itself out of power. Saddam Hussein, like many other young Ba'athists, found himself on the wrong side again of the new government that was coming to power in Iraq.
After months in hiding, Saddam Hussein and his uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, are smoked out, arrested, and jailed. But the conditions in which they are held are not harsh. and security is relaxed. But they are furious at the treatment they are getting at the hands of their one-time allies. Saddam, for one, is determined to win back his freedom. 2 years into his imprisonment, Saddam Hussein gets the chance he has been waiting for. The party has been secretly arranging his escape. While being transported to court, Saddam's guards allow him to stop at a restaurant. When the prearranged time comes, Saddam thanks his hosts for their hospitality and casually walks out. After his escape from prison, Saddam goes underground for a year. But the Ba'ath Party has a job for the tough young man from Tikrit. He'll be the muscle behind organizing the secret party cells that will steer the Ba'athists back into power.
One of the reasons that Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr uses Saddam Hussein is that Saddam Hussein in the 1960s had become past master of what might call street politics of the Ba'ath. And so he wasn't an army man, he was outside the army completely, but what he could organize in was in the streets, in the universities, bands of thugs and semi-militia groups wandering around, the secret apparatus of the Ba'ath Party.
Saddam Hussein's chance for a grab at power arrives sooner than he ever imagined. In June 1967, tensions between the powerful Arab states of Syria and Egypt on the one hand, and Israel on the other, explode into war. In days, the Arabs are decisively beaten. The shockwaves of the defeat spread across a humiliated Arab world. In Iraq, angry army officers mount yet another coup against the government. Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam's cousin from Tikrit, is made president. But the real power behind the throne in the new regime will be Saddam Hussein.
The Ba'ath Party created a committee called Maktab al-Alaqat al-Amma, that's Public Relations Committee, which does not indicate its real function. It was in charge of the security service, of the intelligence service, military service, and Saddam volunteered to take that position actually.
Saddam is made deputy chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council and head of the regime's internal security service. Now Hussein, one of the most thuggish and brutal members of the Ba'ath Party, is given the power of life and death. His first act is to order a roundup of leading members of other political parties. Saddam calls it the correction movement. Thousands are thrown into concentration camps, tortured, and killed. In the 3 years after the Ba'ath Party takes control in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, the number 2 man, works round the clock to seize every ounce of power for himself. Hussein becomes chief of a string of government departments: the Peasants Department, the Oil Committee, and the Workers' Union. He also handles relations with the Kurdish minority and the Arab states. Working 18-hour days, Saddam becomes the master of a well-oiled machine. Shortly after the coup, Hussein brings the Ba'ath Party founder Michel Aflaq to Iraq and makes him official leader of the party. Saddam has good reason to be grateful to Aflaq, his mentor. In the Ba'ath Party, with its Nazi-like organization of strict discipline and hierarchy, secret police and informers, Aflaq has created the perfect instrument for a leader whose only wish is to become the unchallenged tyrant of Iraq and the whole Arab world. Saddam Hussein, the future dictator, is Michel Aflaq's creation. Of all Aflaq's protégés, only Saddam possesses the ruthlessness to claw his way to power. Saddam, veteran of a string of coups against the government, determined to stay in power, whatever the cost. The solution lies in a subtle mixture of favoritism and terror. First comes the terror. Saddam coins a chilling saying, "If there is a person, there is a problem. If there is no person, there is no problem."
One by one, he picks off all his close political associates in the upper reaches of the Ba'ath Party, to the point whereby, certainly by 1972, within 4 years, he is the power behind the throne of President Bakr.
Saddam Hussein is no longer number 2 in the regime. He's actually the most powerful man of Iraq, and he's often talked about as the strong man of Iraq.
In Saddam's Iraq, nobody is safe. The loyal are rewarded with jobs and position. The disloyal disappear into one of Saddam's hellish prisons and are never seen again. To underline the message to an offender's relatives, after executing a political opponent, Saddam actually bills the family for the cost of the bullets. After 11 years of playing junior partner to Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam decides it is time to take his rightful place as ruler of Iraq. Al-Bakr, his cousin, is quietly pushed aside. He will die mysteriously 3 months later. Saddam Hussein is sworn in as President of Iraq on July 17, 1979. Now the dictator who ardently studied Mein Kampf as a young man is ready to put his learning and his family's dark legacy to the test. Within days of taking power as president, Hussein means to follow the example of his uncle Khairallah Tulfa's hero, Adolf Hitler. His first strike is to kill his opponents in the party's leadership in one fell swoop. But Saddam can send out his terrifying message in a way that Hitler could never do. He will videotape the whole terrifying event as a lesson and a warning. Baghdad, July 22, 1979. 5 days after Saddam Hussein is inaugurated as President of Iraq, he summons a meeting of all the top Iraqi Ba'ath Party officials from around the country.
They all thought rather innocently that they were coming to Baghdad simply to proclaim the new leader of the Ba'ath Party and the new President of Iraq. But once the meeting got underway, Saddam completely turned the tables and turned it into a sort of Stalin-esque putsch.
With video cameras set up to record the entire event, Saddam accuses 60 party leaders of being part of a massive plot to overthrow him. The atmosphere in the hall is electric. One by one, the accused men, stunned and terrified, are led away by security guards. As Saddam ruefully wipes a tear from his eye, other party members stand and proclaim their devotion to Iraq's new dictator. Over the following days, the accused are tortured and shot. Saddam personally executes some of the victims. He also forces the surviving leaders to shoot some of the victims themselves. Immediately after the meeting, Saddam and the surviving leaders pose on the balcony for a crowd that has been organized to chant for Hussein and shout for revenge on traitors. Even though Saddam by now has countless mortal enemies, he is confident he will survive any attempts they might make to do to him what he has done to them. He surrounds himself with people he can trust, fellow clan members from his own district of Tikrit. Hussein's entire family will become members of the fascist Ba'ath Party.
Iraq under Saddam Hussein, the Ba'ath Party under Saddam Hussein, becomes the preserve of his own clan, his own family, the people he really trusted. And it's from that period on that his power becomes virtually absolute.
Not only does Saddam protect himself physically from attack, he guards himself in another way too. Like Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany, Saddam creates an all-pervasive cult of leader worship, instilling in the Iraqi population feelings of deep loyalty and ensuring total obedience.
The propaganda machine is really cranked fully into action to perpetrate this myth of the great invincible Saddam Hussein, the Lion of Iraq, the Defender of Iraq, the new Saladin. It's a very, very clever operation.
Already, Saddam Hussein is pitching to become the leader of a massive united Arab world. He espouses the Palestinian cause as his own and poses with the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat. There is already a deep connection between Arafat and Saddam. Arafat's mentor and one-time boss is the late Grand Mufti Amin al-Husseini, the architect of the pro-Nazi coup against the British in Iraq in 1941. Yasser Arafat even claims the Mufti is his uncle. But Saddam knows that purging his enemies in the party and unleashing his secret police on the Iraqi people is not enough to keep him in power. Like Adolf Hitler, Hussein believes that the best way to preserve his power is to go to war. Anyone who opposes him is now an enemy of Iraq and a traitor, and must be annihilated. Iraqi forces invade Iran on September 22, 1980. Saddam calculates that if he wins, he will be hailed as the strongman and undisputed leader of the Arab world. He boasts he will be in the Iranian capital Tehran in 3 days. In fact, the war will last 8 years and cost 1 million lives. But for now, as war with Iran is just beginning, and war with the United States is a decade in the future, Saddam is at the peak of his power. Supported by pro-Nazis, he has fulfilled his dream of ruling Iraq and might in time conquer the whole of the Middle East. After a lifetime clawing his way to the top, he is worshipped and feared by millions of Iraqis. It is a long way from his poverty-stricken boyhood into Crete. 3 men paved Saddam's way, all of them wedded to the ideology of Nazi Germany. Michel Aflaq, the man who created the fascist Ba'ath philosophy and its secretive party machine. The Grand Mufti, who fought the British in Palestine and Iraq and became an SS general in Germany. And ever more paranoid and unpredictable, blaming those around him for his own mistakes. And always, like Hitler, Saddam would lead the Iraqi people by using violence and murder.
I think Saddam, at the end, became a megalomaniac.
He has killed hundreds of thousands, and if given the chance, he would kill millions. This man is a killer so profound that he will be remembered in the halls of the worst murderers of mankind.